Hey, I'm Chris Zepp from Make Everything, and today I'm going to show you a really simple way to make embossed leather patches using a 3D printer. Check it out. Okay, so we're actually starting this project on the computer and we're going to be using Google SketchUp. This is the free version of SketchUp Make. It's the desktop version for Mac. So we're going to start with the template that we're using. I always use the interior and product design inches template, but you can use whatever you're comfortable with. And I always work from the top view. So it feels like I'm drawing in 2D and then I can create the 3D image. So I like to draw a reference line just so I can understand where my zoom is. So I'm about right. And the main tool we're going to be using for this is the 3D text tool. So you can see mine is pretty much set up already, but you can see the settings that I'm using. And then if you wanted to change the font, you would go over to fonts, choose your font, and then make sure you change your height here. So sometimes I use 3/8, but in this case, I'm going to use 1/4 inch. And I want that 1/8 inch extrusion already. So you can see if I do a sample text, you can see what it would look like. And if I change the view, you can see that text sticking up there. And that's what I'm looking for the size stamp that I'm going to be making. So now that we understand the way the text tool works, we're just going to draw the boundary box for the stamp that we want to make. In my case, I'm going to make it 3 by 2 by 3, more so as a reference. It's a little hard to gauge how the text is going to lay out when you're typing it, so I like to draw a reference of the box and then write out the words or the text that I want to use and see how they fit. So you can see that my box is a little big, but I want my text to be 1/4 inch. So I'm going to reshape the box to match the text as I typed it. So I can redraw some lines now to create a tighter boundary box, and I'm going to wind up at 1.25 inches by 1 3/4 on my initial border. I like the logo sort of offset to the side. And now that I have those lines drawn, I can erase these other lines around it. The next tool I'm going to be using is the offset tool, and I'm going to be offsetting by 1/16 of an inch to create a little border around the text that I'll also extrude out. And this just is more for the visual of it. I happen to like the way it looks to have this sort of border. And I will do a 1/16 inch offset, followed by another 1/16 inch offset, followed by a third 1/16 inch offset. And the reason for the third 1/16 inch offset is it'll create the two raised borders that I'm going to use. So I can delete the little area in the middle and I can delete the background around my text. And then I can extrude out those two little borders the same 1/8 of an inch as my text is extruded. And now you can see the whole 3D logo that I'm going to be creating into a stamp. And if we check the dimension of it, the final dimension, we're going to be at 1.5 inches by 2 inches, which is perfect. So now the work in SketchUp is completed for me. I delete those dimensions and then I switch to my top view and I select everything that I want to 3D print. Now I'm going to need to flip it in the red direction, which is going to make it a reverse image, but preserve all my dimensions because the stamp needs to actually display backwards when it's printed, so it will read forwards once it's embossed into the leather. Once that's done, I can export it as an STL, which is what my 3D printing software needs. I leave the model unit and the file format the same, and I export it onto my desktop. And we're good to go into our 3D printing software. Now I'm using a Makerbot to print this, and I use their old Makerbot software. It's just what I'm comfortable using, but whatever software works with your 3D printer is what you should use. I want to make sure that I preserve the scaling that I did in SketchUp, so I just make sure that that's going to happen. And what I found is important for my purposes is I need this to be printed on a raft. And if you're not familiar with 3D printing, a raft is something that is printed before the actual object is printed. And it's usually so that you can peel it off the raft, but my printer in particular will stick very well to the raft. So I always print it to a raft. And you can see my print's going to take 45 minutes. I can see what it looks like, and it's ready to go. So I will export this and put it in the printer, and we'll see how it comes out.
Okay, so like I said, I left mine attached to the raft, and I'm going to leave it there. And here are just some scraps of 3/4 inch plywood. They're not really cut to any specific length. These are 3.5 by about 6 3/4. And for my size embossing stamp, which again measures out at 1.5 inches by 2 inches, that's like a good size. So I'm just going to sort of center this, and then I'm going to use some 5-minute epoxy to glue this down. And a good trick with epoxy, 2-part epoxy, if you draw lines with your various parts, it's very easy to make sure that you put the same amount of each part down. Okay, so now that these two pieces are done, this is glued up in there. What I like to do is kind of make them specific to a vise. So I like to use this big vise. I would recommend, use the biggest vise that you have till you get the most grabbing power. And what I'll do is I'll just label the top of both of these. And then what I'll do is I'll put them in the vise. And I want to make sure that wherever this lands, I want the clamping pressure to be right down on there. So when I put this in the vise, I want to make sure that my vise jaws are right in the middle of those lines that I just drew. So this is just kind of a test. And now that I've got this lined up the way I want, what I'll actually do is come over here and trace the vise jaws onto these. Now this is not an exact process. It's not super critical that this be perfect, but it's just nice to have a reference. So now let's get some leather. Okay, so this is veg tan leather that I got on Amazon. You can buy this from a lot of different sources. Tandy leather, I know, is a good one. I just buy these on Amazon. They're very manageable. This is a full roll. It's like maybe 20 bucks. And I'm just going to cut a manageable strip off of this, and we'll make a couple of stamps on it. So, cut that. That's perfect. So I like to cut a long strip just so that I have like a little bit of room to grab onto it when I'm clamping it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to head over the sink and wet this. And that's enough. It doesn't have to be like totally super soaked, just wet. Okay, so now I'm going to take my wet leather and I'm going to situate it on the stamp. Take my other piece, put it on there, make sure it's oriented the right way. And I left my leather a little bit oversized, so I don't have to be too crazy about getting it perfect. You'll drive yourself nuts if you try and save that little bit of leather by making these the perfect size. And I already have my vise kind of tight, so it makes it so that when this slips in there, there's not really anywhere for it to go. Just checking everything again, and then I'll just make that nice and tight. All right. And I'm going to leave this for 10 minutes. So once this is out of the press, it's still a little bit wet, but I'll just cut it now while I have it out. Okay, so that about does it for the stamp. Once the leather dries, you can do a lot of things to it. You can apply dyes to it. Here you see I have a couple different sizes of my logo, different versions with a single border and a double border. I usually use a leather glue and I glue them to hats. For beanies, I'll stitch them on there. And that's about it. So it's a really easy process and you can design anything you want. 3D print it and then emboss it into leather. All right, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Again, this is a really simple way to make, custom leather patches. You can do a lot with these. Like I said, glue them to fabric, stitch them to fabric, just give them out as business cards. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below. If you like what you saw, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel. And if you want to see some behind the scenes stuff, what we got going on in the shop, don't forget to follow us at Make Everything Shop on Instagram. I sell the hats on my website along with shirts and other goodies, so you should check that out. All the links are down below. And some affiliate links to some of the products I use are also down there. Thanks again, and I hope to see you on the next video.